And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January 27th day of this new year. Just 338 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Well, holidays and observances. It's National Chocolate Cake Day. Indulge in this delectable cocoa-based dessert. Make the original pioneering recipe or put a modern twist to it. And it's National Geographic Day. Pele A, which is a interesting festival, I guess you could say. It's a vibrant fire festival celebrated in the Shetland Islands. Thousands of folks gathered to witness the breathtaking sight of a longship ablaze illuminating the night sky. Participants dress up as Vikings and they parade through the streets, adding an air of excitement. The day pulses with energy from the morning's activities to the evening's fiery climax. The human imagination just is mind-boggling. National Plan for Vacation Day. It was established in 2017 by the U.S. Travel Association. National Plan for Vacation Day acts as an annual reminder that people have vacation days. Quite often they have to use or lose. Thomas Crapper Day. Revolutionizing plumbing. Innovator's legacy transformed the way we handle necessities, I guess you could say. Speed Up and Succeed Day. World Breast Pumping Day. Punch the Clock Day. Efficiently tracking work hours. These devices signal the day's bookends, ensuring time's rhythm and fair compensation. Vietnam Peace Day, as if. Auschwitz Liberation Day. International Holocaust Remembrance Day. By learning about the Holocaust, we can honor the victims and survivors and work toward preventing such atrocities in the future. Family Mediation Week. Suits and Sneakers for Cancer Week. Artes Mundi. Catholic Schools Week. National School Choice Week. And Snow Sculpting Week. Famous people born this date. Mimi Rogers and Patton Oswalt. That's one I haven't heard of either. But he apparently is quite well known in certain quarters. Well, let's see what stories we have in the news now that we've done holidays and observances. Well, anti-ICE agitators were arrested outside a Minnesota hotel as police declare unlawful assembly. It's no longer peaceful, they said. The anti-ICE agitators were arrested outside a hotel Monday after authorities said the demonstrators escalated and the gathering was no longer considered peaceful. Demonstrators are outside the Spring Hill Suites by Marriott in Maple Grove, Minnesota, where they believed U.S. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino was staying. President Trump announced Bovino and many of his agents would be leaving Minneapolis as part of a reshuffling of leadership and carrying out his immigration crackdown and bipartisan scrutiny over the immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis that intensified after agents killed an American recording Border Patrol activity over the weekend. Border Czar Tom Homan expected to now lead the effort in that state. Maple Grove police said officers responded on Monday to reports of a protest at the hotel, and protest escalated when agitators allegedly began throwing objects at officers and damaging property. After police declared an unlawful assembly and issued a dispersal order, several people who refused to leave were arrested. And we'll see how that plays out. Well, Charlemagne the God, rapper and podcast host, predicts a demagification in the future, like how Nazi ideology was outlawed in post-war Germany. He criticized the Trump administration during his Monday broadcast, telling the listeners he believes there'll come a day when President Trump and his allies are prosecuted. Charlemagne is one of many commentators reacting to the death of 37-year-old activist and nurse Alex Preti, following a confrontation with federal immigration agents. Debate surrounding Preddy's death centered on the fact he was carrying a holstered firearm, prompting a national discussion over whether individuals within their constitutional rights to carry guns at protests, particularly during confrontations with police. It's not the smartest thing to do, folks. Well, according to Charlemagne, how many people who serve this regime are going to continue to wipe their rear ends with the document they represent that represents the Supreme Court of the U.S.? I get the impression Charlemagne is a hard leftist. Well, according to Liz Peek, here's the one and only thing that Democrats actually care about. The question was asked, are Democrats heartless or just plain stupid? Are they so committed to scoring political points they're willing to hurt ordinary people? Well, consider, if you will, the top leaders in the Empire State. The most recent example, the cusp of a historic storm and record-breaking cold. New York City Mayor Zoran Mandami ended his predecessor's policy of cleaning out homeless encampments. Is it just a coincidence that 3 people are found dead on the streets of the city on the morning of Saturday, January 24th, when the temperature dropped into the single digits? 2 men and a woman believed to be homeless were discovered dead outside, though the details of their deaths are not yet available. Likely nobody could survive sleeping on the pavement in near zero weather. Now, in the house with the heater running, we were cold here, and we're in Texas, folks. Well, post-Maduro, pressure builds on Mexico over Cuba's new oil lifeline. Venezuela dictator Nicolas Maduro's regime was crucial to propping up America's closest communist neighbor, Cuba, for many, many years. With the despot now in a New York prison, U.S. lawmakers and analysts are turning their attention to Mexico, a top U.S. ally and trading partner has quietly taken Venezuela's place. As of January, Mexico reportedly accounted for 13,000 barrels per day, or 44% of Cuba's 2025 oil imports. Top factor keeping what some lawmakers describe as a teetering economy barely afloat. With renewed trade talks approaching in July, Republican lawmakers and conservative analysts are calling for increased pressure on Mexico to cut off Cuba's oil lifeline. That would certainly cause a rethink in Havana. Well, Billie Eilish calls out silent celebs as outrage grows over Alex Preddy killing. Now, where were they when folks on the right were being abused and injured? They were silent. Grammy Award-winning singer and songwriter Billie Eilish shared a blunt and onward message to her fellow celebrities in light of their silence amid unrest in Minnesota. She said, "Hey, my fellow celebrities, you going to speak up?" Or she has 125 million followers, apparently. And she wrote that in an Instagram story. Her comments came after killing of Alex Preddy, 37, who was fatally shot by a federal agent in Minneapolis. The incident marks the second fatal shooting involving a federal officer this month. Her post came during a slew of reposts condemning violence in Minnesota. Also taking aim at high-profile figures she accused of failing to use their platforms to speak out. Well, the skiers suffered a brutal mauling after stepping within 10 feet of a snow leopard for a photo. Female skier was viciously mauled by a snow leopard on Friday after approaching the predator too closely for a photo. That's according to footage of the incident. The encounter that led to the woman's face being severely bloodied occurred about 7 p.m. in Fuyun County, along China's northern border with Mongolia, according to Jam Press. Footage shows a woman reportedly edged as close as 10 feet to the leopard, lying motionless in the snow as the predator hovered nearby after the mauling. Witnesses then appeared to help guide her away as blood poured from her face. Local reports said the woman miraculously survived, partly because her helmet helped prevent some of the more serious harm. Well, I don't care how close you get. If it's a snow leopard, you ought to be smart enough to know it's not going to be happy about being approached that close. Well, former Trailblazer center Chris Dudley makes his second run for governor of Oregon. He's taking his best shot at being the next governor. He's a Republican and a 16-year NBA veteran, announced his candidacy for the role in a video posted online. He said, "I love Oregon, and even though we have had some serious problems, there are solutions, and I believe our best days are ahead of us," he said in a video. However, in order to solve these challenges, the empty promises, the name-calling, the finger-pointing, and fear-mongering that has solved nothing has to stop. Oregon deserves better. He spent 6 of his 16 NBA seasons in Portland as the team's center. Now he's going to try to be the center of the state. Well, deadly cancer risk has spiked with certain levels of alcohol consumption, according to a new study. Drinking heavily and consistently over an adult's lifetime could lead to a higher risk of colorectal cancer, according to a study published in a Journey Cancer by the American Cancer Society. The study analyzed 20 years of data from more than 88,000 U.S. adults to determine how long-term drinking impacts the risk of developing colorectal cancer, or precancerous colorectal edemas. Participants report their average weekly intake of beer, wine, and liquor during 4 age periods, 18 to 24, 25 to 39, 40 to 45, and 55 and older. Heavy drinkers were identified as having more than 14 drinks a week. Moderate drinkers had between 7 and 14 drinks a week. Now, even drinking causes problems. Archaeologists have uncovered an eerie Anglo-Saxon sand bodies at a nuclear power station site. The excavators recently unearthed an Anglo-Saxon princely grave containing 2 men, a horse, and grave goods from the construction of a nuclear power station in England. Discovery was made at the Sizewell Sea Centre near Tiverton in Suffolk. Dates back to the 7th century A.D. In the release, officials described the finding as a high-status grave containing 2 individuals buried alongside a fully harnessed horse, weapons, and personal items. Grave goods included weaponry, shields, a bronze vessel, and a silver-rimmed cup or horn, all artifacts that indicate the high status of the people involved. These finds suggest individuals or elite members of the Anglo-Saxon society, and they reflect their complex burial traditions. Well, President Trump says Iran called numerous times to make a deal as the carrier group enters the Middle Eastern waters. Iran appears to be looking to negotiate with the U.S. amid a growing military buildup in the Middle East. In a Monday interview with Axios, Trump suggested Iran's reaching out on numerous occasions and wants to make some kind of deal. According to U.S. officials, also cited by Axios, any potential agreement will need Iran to remove all enriched uranium, cap its long-range missile stockpile, and a change in support for regional proxy forces, and cease independent uranium enrichment, terms Iranian leaders have not agreed to so far. The USS Abraham Lincoln has arrived in the Middle East amid tensions with Iran. Trump's also described the situation Iran is in flux and pointed to the arrival of what he called a big armada, bigger than Venezuela, referencing the recent deployment of the U.S. naval assets. It previously reported by Fox News, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier entered CENTCOM waters in the Indian Ocean on Monday, amid increasing threats from Iran. We'll see how long their threats continue. Well, millions are digging out and thousands without power, are waiting for the next winter storm threat. Utility crews are working around the clock to restore power after this weekend's crippling winter storm, while millions along the East Coast are bracing for another storm. Some computer forecast models paint a startling picture of big snowstorms smacking the Carolinas to New England with heavy snow and strong winds. But forecasters are cautioning that these bombastic model images can be misleading, too far in advance of the system even developing. Right now, they say there is a threat of heavy snow on the southeast coast on Saturday and up to the mid-Atlantic and New England on Sunday. We had snow actually here on Sunday. It was fascinating. Nobody quite knew what to do about it. Well, a Christian nurse who faced racial abuse from transgender patients been reinstated after a suspension. The UK nurse was disciplined for misgendering a patient, later suspended for speaking publicly about the case, had been reinstated after an investigation took place. At a hearing Tuesday, nurse Jennifer Melly learned her employer, Epsom and St. Helier University Hospitals NHS Trust, was dropping its case against her after investigating her for an alleged data breach related to the incident. She told Fox News the ordeal began when she was called in to help care for a prisoner patient whom she said was agitated and was frightening other patients on the ward. During a clinical discussion with a doctor, Melly said after she referred to the biological male patient as Mr. and he, her patient became angry and demanded she address him as a woman. Melly declined, saying to do so would go against her Christian faith, but offered to use the patient's name instead. She said then the patient started using racial slurs and threatened her. Well, this transgender mess is really getting out of control. Well, according to Senator Ruben Gallego, he won't help fund a rogue ICE that shoots first and calls it law enforcement. On Sunday, there was a video that millions of Americans have now seen in Minnesota. Federal immigration officers shot and killed another civilian point blank. And from the start, the officers immediately escalated the situation. Before they fired, the man was already laying on the ground unarmed and posed no threat. The officers shot over 10 times in 5 seconds. According to Gallego, he was in a high-pressure combat situations in Iraq. Didn't always know if civilians were a threat or not, but I was trained to de-escalate situations first. Not to get drunk on power and shoot first. What the agents in Minnesota did was absolutely murder. Well, no matter how many folks see it, you still get differing opinions. Well, according to Jesse Waters, the unrest in Minnesota is a lot more coordinated than you might think it is. There's a lot of paid agitators there. Well, we've got Costco's popular bargain meal is the center of a new lawsuit. Class action lawsuit claims its Kirtland signature rotisserie chicken contains sodium phosphate and carrageenan despite the marketing claims. You know, all these folks with all this money to go file all these silly lawsuits, it's getting out of control. Costco's facing a class action lawsuit accusing the warehouse retailer of falsely advertising its Kirtland signature seasoned rotisserie chicken contains no preservatives. That's according to court documents. The lawsuit was filed Thursday in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of California. Of course, it's California. Alleges that Costco's in-store signage and website create an overall net impression that a rotisserie chicken does not contain added preservatives. But the suit claims these representations are false, arguing the rotisserie chicken is made of 2 added preservatives, sodium phosphate and carrageenan. Well, if you don't want the chicken, I'd say don't buy it. Landman star Ali Larder admits the bikini scenes are the hardest part of filming the hit show. She admitted her bikini scenes in Landman are the most challenging for her to do. After an interview with People magazine, the 49-year-old actress, who quite frankly looks quite fetching in her bikinis, she plays Angela Norris in the hit Paramount Plus series, describes shooting scenes in which her character wears bikini as tough in a weird way. She said, I don't think there's an actress alive that's like, woo, got a bikini scene. Nobody wants to do it. These are the hardest for her, she said. I don't enjoy them. It's just part of the story she's telling, and she's an actress, so she gets on board. But they're definitely her least favorite. Now, she's the confident and glamorous ex-wife of Billy Bob Thornton's Tommy Norris. The Varsity Blues star noted her character is so physical and loves the spray tans and the blonde. Larder explained that portraying Angela, who's often clad in revealing clothing, requires effort and discipline to ensure she's staying in shape for this role and all that comes with it. Well, that's one downside to doing something like that. Well, one of God's anointed, a federal judge, has blocked President Trump's DOJ having access to the Oregon voter rolls. The Trump administration went on to view the state's unredacted voter rolls on Monday. Judge Mustafa Kusabahai said he plans to dismiss the Justice Department lawsuit and file a final written opinion in the coming days. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield held Monday's ruling, arguing DOJ seeking a backdoor to grab Oregon residents' personal information. And when you're one of God's anointed, you can say and do anything you want to, and everybody cheers you on. The law doesn't really make any difference. Well, a Chicago teacher been placed on leave after Facebook post supporting ICE sparks an outrage from activists. Chicago area teachers on administrative leave and facing calls to lose his job over a Facebook post last week offering support for ICE. The teacher at West Chicago's Gray Elementary School said, "Go ICE," posted that on Facebook last week. Shortly after that post was made, activists in the predominantly Hispanic community began sharing the post and calling for action to be taken against the teacher, who Fox News is not naming due to safety concerns. Imagine working as a teacher in elementary school in West Chicago, where the Latino community is highly populated, and promoting ICE. Another commentator calls the teacher a effing piece of S. Yes, the days of free speech are long in the past, clearly. And Canada is a small power biting the hand that protects it, according to a lot of commentators. Our neighbor and ally to the north, Canada, has 42 million people and a GDP of $2.4 trillion, but doesn't even spend 2% of that GDP on defense. Its new prime minister, Mark Carney, promises it will reach that minimum standard for NATO alliance members by 2030. Last conservative years in which Canada contributed 2% of its GDP to the defense needs of the West occurred in 1989 and 1990, after which defense expenditures dropped significantly. Canada answered the bell after 9/11, and while its standing military is quite small, it's only 68,000. It sent troops to Afghanistan from the beginning of that war and kept them there to 2014. Sacrificing 158 of their soldiers on that faraway battlefield. Well, apparently, Canada feels that we're going to protect them if something happens, so they don't need to pony up. Well, let's finish our news stories for the moment. We're going to go back to the story we started yesterday about Anastasia. Well, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the entire royal family was murdered by the Nazis. The one that supposedly escaped was Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolovna, born June 18, 1901. Child of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of the ailing Russian Empire, and his wife, the hated Alexandra. Tsarina Alexandra was hated by a large majority of the Russian people for a couple of reasons. One thing, the Russians had a xenophobic hatred of all things German, which wasn't helped when Germany and Russia went to war in 1914 during World War I. Alexandra just so happened to be of German heritage. In fact, the Russians never let her forget, since they routinely demonstrated their contempt by calling her that German lady. The other source of their hatred was her closeness with a strange Russian monk by the name of Rasputin. The monkish Rasputin had come to prominence due to his ability to apparently heal Anastasia's brother Alexei of symptoms brought on by the hemophilic disorder he suffered from. Now, nobody really knows how Rasputin was able to calm this troubled child, although theories range from his use of hypnotism to outright supernatural powers that the strange monk held. In any case, the Russian people were suffering under great economic duress and wartime trauma. Didn't appreciate the Russian royal family consulting with a monk who apparently had a penchant for drinking, orgies, and other less reputable behavior. And soon the royal family was overthrown outright. Communists took over and Russia became the Soviet Union. And between all that, the Russian royal family had been in prison and all of them executed. Or at least that was the story that history tells us. But there's been a lot of stories that not all of them were executed. And herein lies the conspiracy. One of the royals was believed to have somehow escaped his grisly fate. It was rumored that the beautiful young Anastasia was allowed to escape and lived on in hiding. And this rumor continued to spread until in 1920, a woman who called herself Anna Anderson claimed to actually be Anastasia. She was living in Berlin, Germany, the same hated German of the Tsarina's youth. The story apparently came to life after she jumped off a bridge with what was supposedly a suicide attempt. She was rescued, but when she was revived, she claimed she was suffering from amnesia. Then she was taken to a psychiatric facility where somebody there actually began speaking at length of how she resembled the Russian royals. At this point, Anna seemed to latch on to this sentiment and either admitted or remembered she was indeed Anastasia. Claimed that she survived the massacre that killed the rest of her family. When a soldier felt sorry for her and helped smuggle her out of that execution chamber by hiding her in a blanket. Now, in addition to giving her a little bit of notoriety, there was some international trust available to members of the Russian royal family. And certainly, she wouldn't have turned that down, I'm sure. She claimed she was so thankful for the rescue she fell in love with, and the man, they got married and went off to live in Romania, of all places. But here, things took another tragic turn when her rescuer turned husband perished in a street fight, and the child she had with him was placed in an orphanage. She claimed it was then that she went to Berlin and out of despair tried to kill herself. Now, this was a strange and thought-provoking story. The claimant to the Russian throne got quite a bit of attention, of course. While she was still riding high on all this attention, she moved to America and married a guy named John Manahan, become Anastasia Manahan. Spent the rest of her days in Charlottesville, Virginia, till she passed away in 1984. She never recanted the story she told, and to this day there are those who still wonder if it might be true. Bolstering her claims was none other than the real Anastasia's cousin, Princess Xenia. Went so far as to pay the claimant a visit. And Xenia walked away utterly certain this was indeed Anastasia, the girl she knew in her youth. Even insisted they had shared private memories this woman who claimed to be Anastasia was able to readily recall without any assistance from her. Not everybody believed she was Anastasia, though, and one royal Grand Duke, Ernst of Germany, actually launched an investigation of his own. His painstaking research revealed the claimant was most likely a Polish woman by the name of Franziska Szankowska. It strangely vanished right about the same time the Anastasia claimant emerged. Could Franziska and this woman claiming to be Anastasia be the same person? Well, that was precisely the conclusion the Duke came to. Anastasia denied these findings, of course, but of course we all know DNA doesn't lie. And the world was shocked in 2007 when DNA testing revealed Anastasia to be likely a fraud. DNA didn't match anybody in the Romanov family. On the contrary, further testing actually linked her to the Polish woman, Francesca Szankowska. It was an intriguing conspiracy theory while it lasted, but the notion that Anastasia survived the Soviet slaughter of the Russian royals would seem to be false. Well, conspiracy theories have long been trying to make sense of the loose threads that they believe hold everything together. Typically, when there's a lack of information about any given topic, folks will begin to try and guess and see if they can put the pieces of information together on their own. And this is how conspiracy theories come into being. During the Great Fire of Rome, that's precisely what happened. We saw this occurring on both sides from multiple angles. If Nero wasn't actually responsible for the fire, he too looked toward conspiracy. He looked at that secretive group of Christians and considered some of their more thought-provoking messages, such as prophecies of Rome's future destruction. And he wondered if perhaps they were the ones that set fire to Rome. Conspiracies seem to fill a void in human consciousness with other details are lacking. Simply the nature of the human mind to want to fill in the blanks. We're gifted with a wonderful imagination to connect the dots and create links between subjects otherwise wouldn't have them. It's like looking up at the sky and seeing clouds, immediately thinking they form definite shapes and objects that represent something greater than merely gas molecules floating in the upper reaches of our planet's atmosphere. Flat earthers, on the other hand, look around and think they see the obvious. They see what looks like a solid dome-like firmament encompassing a flat earth. Centuries of circumnavigation and even archival footage from NASA is not enough to convince them that the earth is round. They're determined to believe what they feel their own senses and perspective is telling them. Human capacity for reasoning, understanding, and reaching conclusions is powerful, can go in one direction or another. It can lead us to connect disparate threats or ignore whole tapestries, all depending on how we might feel about them. No matter what we might be pondering, humans are indeed thinking creatures, and we can't help but look up at the heavens and wonder, why? Why are there clouds? Why is there a sky? Why is there a planet? Why are we here at all? So a conspiracy theory is born. Well, there's a number of interesting books that go into various aspects of it. We've been talking about all kinds of down-to-earth conspiracies. Well, we were talking a few shows ago about George Easterbrook and some of the things he had to say about what goes on at Area 51. You know, the U.S. military intelligence community, military and government, have undertaken countless official and off the record as well, projects pertaining to both mind control and mind manipulation, without any doubt whatsoever. Most notorious, of course, is the famous Project MKUltra, clandestine operation operated out of the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence, had its beginnings in the Cold War era of the early 1950s. Now, the goal of MKUltra program, of course, was to figure out ways to control the human mind. Now, the date of that project's actual termination is somewhat hazy. It's known it was definitely in operation as late as the latter part of the 1960s. And not surprisingly and regretfully, has since been replaced by far more controversial and deeply hidden projects. Demonstrate the level of secrecy that surrounded MKUltra. Even though it had kicked off at the dawn of the 50s, its existence was largely unknown outside the intelligence world until 1975. That's when the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission began making their own investigation into the CIA's mind control-related activities, in part to determine if A, the CIA is engaged in illegal activity, and B, the personal rights of citizens had been violated, and C, the projects at issue had resulted in fatalities, which they most assuredly did. One individual, in fact, was one of the CIA's own scientists, dosed with LSD, and he jumped out a window. Rather conveniently and highly suspicious as well, it's asserted at the height of the inquiries in 1975, 2 years earlier, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all the agency's MKUltra files. Fortunately, this didn't stop the Church Committee or the Rockefeller Commission, both of whom had the courage and tenacity to forge ahead with their investigations. They relied on sworn testimony from players in MKUltra, where documentation no longer available for scrutiny, study, and evaluation. The story that unfolded was both dark and disturbing in equal degrees. Indeed, the scope of the project and allied operations as well was spelled out in an August 1977 document entitled The Senate MKUltra Hearings, prepared by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and Committee on Human Resources as a result of their probing into the secret world of the CIA. According to this document, research and development programs to find materials that could be used to alter human behavior were initiated in the late 40s and early 50s. These experimental programs originally included testing of drugs involving witting human subjects and culminated in tests using unwitting, non-volunteer human subjects. These tests were designed to determine the potential effects of chemical or biological agents when used operationally against individuals unaware they had received a drug. The committee then turned its attention to the overwhelming secrecy that surrounded these early 40s and 50s projects. The testing program were considered highly sensitive by the intelligence officials and agencies administering them. Few people, even within the agencies, knew of the programs. No evidence that either the executive branch or Congress were ever informed of them. One of the people who was really a main push behind these programs was Richard Helms, that same CIA director that had the MKUltra files destroyed in 1973 to keep the program hidden from potential investigations. The The highly compartmented nature of these programs may be explained in part by an observation made by the CIA Inspector General that the knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities had serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles, be detrimental to the accomplishment of its missions. That's why we keep our mouths shut and we don't say anything. The research and development programs, particularly the covert testing programs, resulted in massive abridgments of the rights of American citizens, sometimes with tragic consequences. As prime evidence, the committee uncovered details on the deaths of 2 Americans who were firmly attributed to the program at issue. Other participants in the testing programs are said to still be suffering from the residual effects of the tests as late as the mid-1970s. As the committee noted, while some controlled testing of these substances might be defended, the nature of the tests, their scale, and the fact that they were continued for years after the danger of surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting individuals was known demonstrate a fundamental disregard for the value of human life. Far more to come in the Select Committee's investigation of the testing and use of chemicals and biological agents also raised serious questions about the adequacy of command and control procedures within the CIA and the military intelligence, and also about the nature of the relationships among the intelligence agencies. Other government agencies and private institutions, individuals are also allied to this early mind control study. For example, the committee was highly disturbed to learn that with respect to the mind control and mind manipulation projects, the CIA's normal administrative controls were controversially and completely waived for programs involving chemical and biological agents, supposedly to protect their security, but more likely to protect the CIA personnel who knew that they were verging on, if not outright surpassing, the rule of law. Well, the research and development programs, particularly the covert testing programs, resulted in massive abridgments of the rights of the American citizens, sometimes with tragic consequences. That's according to a finding of the committee. Maybe the following statement from the committee that demonstrates the level of controversy that surrounded and still surrounds the issue of mind control projects. The decision to institute one of the Army's LSD field testing projects had been based, at least in part, on the finding that no long-term residual effects had ever resulted from the drug's administration. CIA's failure to inform the Army of a death which resulted from the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting Americans may well have resulted in the institution of an unnecessary and potentially lethal program. The committee went on to add the development, testing, and use of chemical and biological agents by intelligence agencies raises serious questions about the relationship between the intelligence community and foreign governments, other agencies of the federal government, and other institutions and individuals. These questions range from the legitimacy of American complicity in actions abroad which violate American and foreign laws to the possible compromise of integrity of public and private institutions used as cover by an intelligence community. Well, MKULTRA was certainly the most famous of all CIA-initiated mind control programs. It's very far from being an isolated one. There were numerous sub-projects, post-projects, and operations initiated by other agencies that were brought to the committee's attention. One was Project Chatter, which the committee described as a Navy program that began in the fall of 1947. Responding to reports of amazing results achieved by the Soviets in using truth drugs, the program focused on the identification and testing of such drugs for use in interrogation and in the recruitment of agents. The research included laboratory experiments on animals and human subjects involving Anastasia, scopolamine, and mescaline in order to determine their speech-inducing qualities. Overseas experiments were conducted as part of the project. The program expanded substantially during the Korean War and ended shortly after the war in 1953. Then there was Project Bluebird and Artichoke. Again, the committee dug deep and uncovered some controversial and eye-opening data and testimony. Earliest of the CIA's major programs involving the use of chemicals and biological agents, Project Bluebirds was approved by the director in 1950. Its objectives were discovering means of conditioning personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information from them by known means, as well as investigating the possibility of control of an individual with application of special interrogation techniques, and memory enhancement, and finally, establishing defensive means for presenting hostile control of agency personnel. The committee added with respect to Project Bluebird, as a result of interrogations conducted overseas during the project, another goal was added: the evaluation of offensive use of unconventional interrogation techniques, including hypnosis and drugs. And the information about Project Artichoke after the fall of '53 is scarce. The CIA maintains that the project ended in '56, but evidence suggests that Office of Security and Office of Medical Services use of special interrogation techniques continued for several years after that. NK Naomi was another major CIA program in this area. In 1967, the CIA summarized the purpose of NK Naomi as one, to provide for a covert support base to meet clandestine operational requirements, and two, to stockpile severely incapacitating and lethal materials for the specific use of the Technical Services Division, and three, to maintain in operational readiness special and unique items for the dissemination of biological and chemical materials, and four, provide for the required surveillance, testing, upgrading, and evaluation of materials and items in order to assure the absence of defects and complete predictability results. Well, under an agreement reached with the Army in 1952, the Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick was to assist the CIA in developing, testing, and maintaining biological agents and delivery systems. Who knows what went on at Fort Detrick? Well, let's see what else we got in the way of stories. One of the lesser-known aspects of the Bob Lazar controversy is that would suggest he might just have seen an alien entity at Area 51, a live one no less. That story gets very little publicity, but it's fascinating in the extreme. Now, the issue of aliens, and I'm talking about ETs, not those from across the border, but the issue of aliens, alive, dead, or both, at Area 51 first surfaced from Lazar in early 1989. When asked about that specific matter by George Knapp, Lazar quickly shot down the question in an awkward fashion and changed the subject. Later, though, in what was a private rather than a public interview, he opened up a bit more. What he had to say was brief but amazing, if true, of course. According to Lazar, I was walking down the hallway at one time. I was working down there, and there were these doors. The doors that go to the hangar are smaller than the doors in the corridors and have a 9-inch or 12-inch square window with little wires running through it, about head level. As I was walking by, I glanced in and I noticed there were two guys in white lab coats facing me toward the door. Said the two men looking down at a small humanoid figure with long arms, seemingly talking to it. Now, Lazar only saw that figure for a second or so, but he was no doubt what it appeared to be. He said it was, and I'm saying what it appeared to be because Lazar himself wanted it to be some kind of a setup. He said maybe they stuck a doll in front of these guys and made me walk by it and look at it just to see what my reaction would be. Such a thing is not at all impossible. There was one other comment Lazar made that had an impact. He said they play so many mind games, you don't know what's true and what's false sometimes. And while enthusiastic UFO researchers may dearly want to believe living aliens are at Area 51, Lazar's carefully worded statement suggests that we ought to exercise restraint on that issue, at least until or if further vindication comes along. And it's important as well to note that this has an intriguing precedent, very similar tale of fabricated aliens. George Knapp made a thought-provoking statement in 1993 that may well have a bearing on the issue of how the government might be using the UFO issue as a cover for something else, such as a dummy for aliens, we might suggest. According to Knapp, again and again, I've heard self-appointed Groom Lake experts conclude without any reservations that Groom Lake aerial ballet is disinformation, pure theater, a show designed to distract attention away from earthly black projects, or as some sort of exercise in mass psychology. Well, anybody who spends time digging into stories that are distinctly strange is going to find himself on the receiving end of a lot of correspondence from people who read their books or their articles or see their comments online. Very often people want to share their stories or those of family and friends. More often than not, this process opens up a lot of doors and offers greater insight into the subjects that interest everybody. or the UFO phenomenon, cryptozoology, or the field of conspiracy theories. Sometimes, though, the so-called experts find themselves on the receiving end of a very different category of story. And that category is quite possibly the most vexing one of all. The reason being it's filled with intriguing stories, but ones you've never been able to get to the bottom of, and that languish in a realm that might actually be titled fascinating but infuriating. One such account has a bearing on the events at Roswell, Unit 731 in the world of psychological warfare and disinformation. 1977 U.S. Air Force published some reports that suggested the alien bodies seen sprawled around the Foster Ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico in the summer of 1947 were dummies used in parachute experiments. And that's possible because I understand that one was elected to Congress. Now they weren't, but the alien dummy saga has another angle, an incredibly odd angle. 10 years after the Air Force report surfaced, there was a man who claimed his grandfather from the 30s to the 60s worked in the world of Hollywood, specifically in the field of special effects and model making for horror and sci-fi movies. Grandfather also had another string to his bow, a connection to the secret world of the government. And that same connection surfaced in an intriguing fashion. 1945, acclaimed filmmaker Billy Wilder, whose movies included Some Like It Hot and Starlike 17 and The 7-Year Itch, who died in 2002 at the age of 95, directed the English-language version of a documentary called Death Mills, film produced by the U.S. Department of War's Psychological Warfare Department. It's a harrowing but acclaimed production that graphically revealed the sheer and horrific extent of the Holocaust. Pentagon describes psychological warfare as the planned use of propaganda and other psychological actions having the primary purpose of influencing the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of hostile foreign groups in such a way as to support the achievement of national objects. It transpired the plans were afoot for Wilder to make a similar production for the PWD. And the subject, the atrocities undertaken by none other than Japan's Unit 731 during the Second World War. It was a documentary that ultimately didn't come to fruition. And according to that, his source, his grandfather, who worked on Death Mills with Wilder, and as a result came to know some of the PWD personnel very well, as did Wilder. Almost certainly as a result of his work alongside the PWD on Death Mills in 1955, the special effects expert in question was contacted by the psychological warfare planners of the Air Force and offered a lucrative contract. He used his cinematic skills to create what can best be described as fake alien bodies. I had one. I used to sit in the back of the car with his arm up on the window like he was viewing the world as I drive to the Roswell before it became politically unacceptable to the powers that be there. When I go through the checkpoints, they'd be fascinated by my little friend sitting in the back seat. Given the time frame, the mid-1950s, it'd be wholly reasonable to expect that the Air Force would have wanted something to reflect the pop culture of the day. And bug-on Hollywood aliens of this island Earth variety and the Krell of the Forbidden Planet, of the Martian mutants, invaders from Mars. The man was asked to design and create 8 alien bodies, in which just one proviso. They all had to be very lifelike, dwarfish, hairless, and topped off with huge heads. Reportedly, this man's grandson told investigators his grandfather was paid very handsomely for about 3 months of work, undertaken in a specially modified trio of rooms in a military base in Northern California. Doesn't take a genius to guess why the man asked why on earth the Air Force wanted him to fabricate a number of extraterrestrial corpses. He could understand the military taking an interest, and a very deep interest, in really alien bodies, but faked ones constructed by a Hollywood special effects expert. It was puzzling. Well, the rumor that reached the man's attention suggested a fantastic operation was at work. In fact, it was an operation that was twofold in nature. First, the military had a bizarre plan to photograph the body strategically laid out on gurneys or slabs and have the images sent anonymously to the Russian embassy in Washington. And with the photos will be a long and winding fabricated letter, one supposedly written by a communist sympathizer in the U.S. military, warning the Soviets U.S. government had gotten its hands on alien bodies and technologies and were on the way to perfecting that same technology. The latter issue echoes the Phil Corso saga, which surfaced in 1997 and the day after Roswell, and also revolved around claims concerning the secret back engineering of alien technology. I met Phil Corso at one point. Odd individual, in my humble opinion. Strange example of Cold War era psychological warfare proportions, an example designed to scare the hell out of the Russians and have them waste their time chasing down what were really non-existent aliens. But the story had a second part to it as well. At the time, people suspected that the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, several employees were selling secrets to the Soviets, particularly secrets born out of the work of Wright-Patterson's Foreign Technology Division. So a plan is formulated to carefully expose those same commie-loving characters to a couple of alien bodies strategically placed in a vault or a bunker, and I believe Uncle Sam had recovered a crashed UFO, or maybe several, along with their deceased crews. Hollywood special effects experts created alien corpses for the military to film. Images will be leaked to the Soviets. Then it was a case of keeping an eagle eye on all those under suspicion and see which of them, if any, might be prompted to do something out of the ordinary, such as make a phone call to a man named Ivan or meet in a local park with a trench coat wearing character with a foreign looking appearance. It was actually a program designed to ferret out Soviet sympathizers in the military by exposing them to a huge secret that in reality was a huge sham. It all sounds rather bizarre if you think about it, but also makes a lot of sense. After all, what better way to mess with the Soviet mind and root out secret reds in the U.S. than by A, dangling a fabricated carrot and reeling it in the enemy without any real secret ever being compromised? If it's true, this saga may very well help to explain some of the controversial stories where military personnel reported to have been exposed to alleged alien bodies in underground rooms, such as Hangar 18 legends, under convenient circumstances that many skeptical researchers think are just too good to be true. I mean, they might be, but not for the reasons the skeptics think. Eyewitnesses may have been set up to test their loyalty, may have been intended all along for them to see the bodies, or more correctly, the dummies. They kept quiet about what they saw. They were good soldiers and trustworthy. They told their wives or girlfriends they were potential security risks and maybe needed to be watched carefully in the future. As they ran to the Soviet handler, it was jail time. Now, this, of course, leaves us with a pair of highly thought-provoking questions. If the story told was 100% accurate, does that mean that all stories of alien bodies in the morgue are born out of this long-gone Cold War deception? Or does the government have real extraterrestrial corpses on ice? And if they do, is it using the dummy angle just to confuse things even more? Well, these are important questions, ones that many believe may have a significant impact on the story of what it was that Bob Lazar briefly saw at Area 51 back in the late 80s. Was it a dummy? Was it a doll or an alien? Well, the jury's still out. It's a fact that most people who've studied the claims of Bob Lazar focus their attentions on what he had to say about UFOs allegedly held at Air 4, as well as his statements concerning Airline 115. Well, we will finish tomorrow's show. So until tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a happy evening and watch out for aliens.